Hello and welcome back to Hill and Potton's video log live YouTube session. We're very excited today to discuss the PACT Act. I am attorney Allison Reddick, and with me again is VA accredited agent and Marine veteran Kerry Baker. How's it going, Kerry? I know you're excited.
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So basically, what we're going to be doing today is talking about the PACT Act, which I'm sure plenty of you know about, been anticipating movement on this, and the actual official name of it is Sergeant First Class Health Robinson, honoring our promise to address Comprehensive Toxics Act of 2022. And that's why we call it the PACT Act. And this is a huge, huge bill. Like, it covers so much. And Kerry was telling me that even just the burn pit section is more comprehensive than any other bill or legislation that's been passed that, you know, has helped veterans. So since it's so comprehensive, we're going to cover the most important parts that affect the most veterans, and we're not going to cover everything. We're going to try to get to some questions. Most likely we won't get to a lot of them because of the expansiveness of this. So just letting you know, giving you a heads up. But now I'm going to turn it over to Kerry because he is the expert on this, and introduce us to it and tell us why you're so passionate about this and how long you've been involved working on it. I know it's been a long time.
Thank you, Allison. I don't know, expert might not be the right word, but I've certainly been involved with some of this for a very long time. It seems like most of my life. You know, we started the burn pit stuff back around 2007. I shared it with once I got the info on it, I shared it with some reporters. VA hadn't heard about it. Nobody had heard about it at that point. And that sparked it. A lot of other people helped. Burn Pits 360, Rosie Torres. I mean, none of this could have happened if it weren't for folks like that, that stepped in and picked up the fight and have not let up on it. Other issues like Gulf War veterans, Thailand exposure to herbicide agents. You know, it's funny. I wrote the policy on that, or my staff did back in 2010, and here we are with presumptions on that. So there's a lot of parts of this bill that I've got some background on. But having said that, this is a big bill. I've only had a role to play in parts of it. Not every part of it. So this is the combination of numerous bills that have been combined into this one omnibus bill. And it does a lot.
Well, let's take a step back before you go into the bill and kind of talk about where it came from. Okay, so Chairman Mark Takanow came in, he introduced it to the House, it passed through the House, went to the Senate, and now they made amendments, they made changes, and now it's back to the House. And so they have to accept those changes, and then it goes to the president. So it's not a done deal yet. Right. So what amendments did they make, and how do you see that affecting whether it's going to pass or how much longer it's going to take? I know they were supposed to have a meeting about it this week, but we haven't seen anything yet.
Well, and really good point, Allison. You're right. So before it goes to the president, just so everybody knows, both chambers of Congress have to pass the exact same bill. The House has passed it once. It went to the Senate. They passed it with amendments. Therefore, it has to go back to the House. The chairman of the HVAC committee, the House Veterans Affairs Committee, did say last week he was going to bring the bill to the floor this week for a vote. Now, he seemed adamant on that. The president put out a news release saying as soon as it's signed, he will sign it immediately. So as long as the House does what it says they're going to do, or, you know, we should see it pass this week. Now, it went to the Rules Committee yesterday. That's the last we've heard of it. Of course, I mean, that was just yesterday. So there's nothing new on the House website for today. You know, for those of you that have the ability to watch that, I would watch it every day, because if it goes the way the HVAC chairman said, this thing should pass this week. And there's always a chance it won't pass, period. But I would be, at this point, I'd be shocked. I didn't think this was going to pass at all. Now I'd be surprised if it doesn't pass. So that's kind of the status of the bill at the current time.
And
So,
thinking of it not passing is because of the money behind it. I mean, this is going to cost VA like over 300 billion over the next decade. And, you know, I obviously in the capitalistic society, that's going to put a lot of pressure on how money is spending. But, you know, I'm glad we've gotten to this point where people have, you know, caused enough ruckus to give these veterans, you know, access to healthcare and benefits. And alone for the vets exposed to burn pits, I mean, that's more than 3.5 million that we can expand their right to compensation and healthcare. So this is huge.
Yeah, and you asked earlier too, Allison, you know, where did it kind of come from? Now, obviously, there's so many different parts of this bill. Not all of it came about the same way. You know, Thailand veterans, you know, a lot of herbicide agent exposures, things like that. They come from one side of the field where burn pits come from another side of the field, and healthcare and research comes from yet the other side of the field. You know, so it's you can't look at this on one sheet of paper. But some of it is a little bit easy, sort of, to figure out the roots, especially the Gulf War burn pit stuff, because, you know, for what, over 30 years now since the first Gulf War ended, you know, well over 20 since the second one began. You know, policies have been made, regulations have been, you know, adjudicated on these issues that VA has had an enormously hard time following and awarding benefits for. I mean, especially Gulf War and burn pit victims. It doesn't matter that, you know, it had VA followed its rules, in my opinion, and did every case correctly with applying the benefit of the doubt and getting exams correct and looking at all the facts and simply doing what the law requires them to do, I don't think would be here. But they didn't. And for years and years, we pressed them and nothing happened and nothing improved. And just like with the Agent Orange Act, you know, Congress finally got fed up and said, if you're not going to do it right, then we're going to force you to do it our way. And that's kind of what some of this is. You know, not so much all of it, but certainly the Gulf War and Iraq and Afghanistan provisions of this, in my opinion. You know, VA doesn't have to be in this position, or it didn't have to be. But the events over the last 15 years almost dictate that this needs to happen.
I mean, it kind of seems like a cycle. It happened with, like you said, Vietnam. It happened with early Gulf War, and now with these burn pit exposures, it's just 30 years have to go by, and then their hands are forced, and we're making progress. But nonetheless, it's progress, and it will help a lot of veterans. So, like we discussed, this covers. Where do you want to start? There's so many different factions.
Let's just start at the beginning.
Okay.
So, and understand that I mean, I think this bill is great, but there are parts of it I don't agree with. You know, just like every bill, but comparing the good and the bad, I would, you know, if I was in Congress, I would not vote against this bill. But there are parts of it that are, you know, that are a little scary. But for the most part, this is a really good bill. So, what all does it do? And there's going to be some stuff we're not going to get into here because it's probably not what some of you really want and need to hear. For example, the bill starts off with defining what a toxic exposed veteran is. And it creates this new process of determining what that is. But now, for the purposes of probably most of you on this audience and most veterans out there, it's kind of irrelevant. Because if you were in Iraq or Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia or Vietnam or Guam or any of these places that this bill might affect, you are already a toxic exposed veteran. Okay, so the portions of the bill dealing with, hey, what are toxic exposed veterans really it's a new animal to try to figure out things that one could say the bill doesn't address. So going forward, as we get more involved in, hopefully not, skirmishes in the future, how are we going to define somebody that's been exposed to something toxic? And so the bill gets into some of that. We're not going to get into that. Allison, look like you're about to say something.
Well, I know we're not going to get into that, but the next one, talking about toxic exposure risk activity, I wanted to know more about that, because it states, corresponding entry in an exposure tracking record system. That makes me nervous. Like how are they gonna, and I know it states that, you can take into account that people, if it's not tracked, you can still prove it, but can you explain more on that? Because that just kind of makes me nervous.
Which section are you talking about, Allison?
So right below the definitions of toxic exposure and toxic exposed veterans, section C, definition of toxic exposure risk activity. Term toxic exposure risk activity means any activity that requires a corresponding entry in an exposure tracking record system. So, okay, so I mean, for Blue Water Navy and such, they have created these teams within how they're going to do it, and it has to go through that team, and they have to figure out whether you had that exposure or not, based on these record tracking systems. I don't really understand. Well, first of all, that I feel like it's going to delay things, just like Blue Water Navy. This isn't something that's where it's going to be like, yay, it passed. Okay, everyone's going to get benefits right now. Like, I still think it's going to take years. But what are they talking about with the exposure tracking record system? Are they talking about those internal tools that they use?
I think what they're now. All right, so what we're looking at here is subtitle A, toxic exposed veterans. So this was from an independent bill called the Covenant Act. I don't recall who was really behind this. I think it was maybe the Team Coalition, but we don't need to get into that. So they're looking at this as, well, like, what's a radiation exposed veteran? They have that classification kind of outlined, and what I think this is doing is trying to outline now, and in addition to what is a radiation risk activity, what is a toxic exposure risk activity. Now, we don't know what this is going to look like when they craft regulations from all this. Now, what they're talking about, some of the electronic records and stuff, they've been working on the ILR, the individual longitudinal.
That's what I was thinking of, those kind of
right.
stuff.
Yeah, it's in the DOD's ability to track toxic exposures, which is something they've been working on for years. I'm not convinced they are there yet. I don't think they can track that. They say they can do it a lot better than they could. Anybody that's got a claim pending now, or that's had a claim pending or been denied in the past, I mean, that stuff's not going to apply to you, because they can't go back and retroactively track your positions and comings and goings to figure out what you were exposed to. I don't think they're going to be able to do it going forward. I mean, some people's MOSs are going to expose them to certain things. I just would be surprised if all of those get reported in some kind of electronic record system. But if it does, that's great. But now keep in mind, this here toxic exposure risk activity, just because you may or may not fall into that at some point in the future, doesn't mean that's going to limit you from being a toxic exposed veteran. Again, this section here, which I wasn't going to get into that much, is, in my opinion, something going forward for everybody that's part of an exposure group now, like Gulf War or burn pits or Vietnam or any of those. I don't think this, in my reading of it, the section doesn't really apply, because you are a toxic exposed veteran, and the things they have listed in here already includes this stuff. So I think these are more uncommon things that we're going to see in the future, but I don't know how this is going to be rolled out by VA.
And I think I just mentioned it by just saying, there's a lot of ambiguity in this, and don't just depend on VA to get it right the first time. You know, if you have evidence of where you were and how you were exposed, like give them that. I just mean that don't depend on VA to do everything right. Because reading things, we may think it mean one thing and it may mean something else. And it's just not going to be cut and dry. It's going to be just as complicated as other things. I mean, how many Vietnam veterans like didn't get service connected at first because of their conditions, because of where they served and such, and proving that. That's all I meant. So let's move on from that.
Okay. All right. So the Section 103 of this bill, I'm only going to briefly cover this. It says expansion of health care for specific categories of toxic exposed veterans and veterans supporting certain overseas contingency operations. This section reminds me of what the Camp Lejeune Act did, where if you were exposed to Camp Lejeune, you or your dependents, whatever, may be entitled to health care for certain things indefinitely. This seems to apply to that. It's just who gets access to healthcare. And it almost, so for example, I'll just read, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but coming down to one of the sections, a contingency operation specified in this section, in this clause, is any of the following: Operation Enduring Freedom, Freedom Sentinel, Iraqi Freedom, New Dawn, Inherent Resolve, Resolute Support Mission, and some others. And then it talks about the Secretary shall determine the dates in subparagraphs G, H, and I of the following as follows: October 1st, 2024, with respect to veteran described in such paragraph G or H, who has been discharged or released from active military, naval, or air service during the period beginning on August 2nd, 1990, and ending on September 11th, 2001. Those dates are familiar to me. Obviously, we all know what September 11th, 2001 is. August 2nd, 1990 is the date that Iraq invaded Kuwait. So that's the beginning period of the first Gulf War. So this tells me that come October 1st, 2024, these guys are going to have access to healthcare if they don't currently have it, which I think most probably will. And then another group, all right, kicks in October 1st, 2026, from 2001 up till 2006. Another group kicks in October 1st, 2028, from 2007 to 2012. You're probably getting confused of me going through this, because it is confusing. But what this is basically saying, for whatever healthcare benefit this portion is providing, it seems to be providing if you're not enrolled in healthcare and you don't have access to it, you're going to have access to it now. For vets who served in those areas, and the implementation date is going to depend on when you served, when you got out, according to this little table here. And it goes all the way up to October 1st of 2030 for people that served from 2013 to 2018, and October 1st, 2032 for other ones. So again, that's as far as I want to go on that, because we don't know how that's going to look. VHA is going to have to implement that. We specialize in benefits, but just so you know, there are healthcare aspects of this bill. Allison, do you have anything on that part?
It just, like you said, that it's going to be a phase in. Depending on the years that you served, there's a corresponding year. So it's not like everyone gets access to healthcare on this date, because it's 3.5 million people. They're going to phase it in every 2 years and add more, and that's normal. I mean, they've done that with other things as well. So yeah, we can move on from that.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to Title II, Toxic Exposure Presumption Process. I'm not going to go over this very much either, it sounds like I probably should. But this really doesn't apply to the presumptions that currently exist, or the presumptions that this bill is implementing. This is Title II is looking at the process VA currently uses to figure out what's going to become presumptive and what's not going to become presumptive. So this would be a process they would use going forward uh, to figure out, our evidence says that burn pits cause this condition, or let's use our new process and figure out if we can establish a presumption. This was from the TEAM Act. And to be honest, you read this, it's a little deep. It's not going to make sense to you. I didn't agree with this part when this thing was put together. I think the team coalition, not to knock other advocates, I just don't. I did not agree with them on this. It just seems too complicated. So anyway, we're not gonna get into that, but it creates a working group out of VHA and VBA employees. There to look at just a ton of stuff on a regular basis and figure out how VA goes about deciding presumptions in the future. So there's a lot of unknowns to that. We don't know how that's going to look, but of course this bill provides so many presumptions that might not be necessary when it comes really down to it. So I know that's still not the meat and potatoes of what you want to probably hear. Allison?
No, let's keep going.
All right. All right. So getting down to, let me see, where am I at here? Now, before I get into some of the meat and potatoes, one of the amendments that happened in the Senate, one of the reasons that this has to go back to the House and get passed by the House is because they added some amendments that basically gives VA a way to remove presumptions. So if these presumptions that we're getting to, because it does include those, if the secretary determines basically through a set of processes that a presumption for a certain disease should no longer remain in effect, it gives the secretary the ability to take away those presumptions. That worries me. It probably should concern you. But they're going to have to jump through hoops. These are presumptions that Congress is creating. Congress is simply providing VA an avenue to say, look, if you determine that based on all the scientific evidence that we've accumulated to a certain point, that a presumption should not exist for a specific disease, then you can take it away. But now they're going to have to do that officially through Federal Register, notice and comment. The public gets to step in. So that's not an easy process. My concern on that is VA going to expend resources looking into it? And if so, how aggressive are they going to be in looking at what should not be on the presumptive list? So are we going to be fighting things to come in the future of the VA trying to take away presumptions? Well, I kind of doubt, but this is way too early to know, but that is simply one of the things. I don't think anybody can really argue with that, because if the government's going to spend millions and millions of dollars, should they be spending it on something that they finally proven has no relationship to burn pits? I think it's going to be a harder task than it sounds like for them to start removing things, because the burn pits are so bad with so many toxins. You're going to have to, they don't know the research is not out there to show what all it does cause yet. For them to come out and start proving what it doesn't cause, I think that's a tall order. I don't think VA is going to be able to do that, not anytime soon. So, take that.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Just with all the other presumptive issues that have been, created in the past, I don't see them doing that, and there would be a lot of backlash. But are there any specific ones that you could see would be targeted towards that? I would think it may be more obscure things, or if it's from a monetary side and they're trying to attack things, something that a lot of people are affected by.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot. Well, we'll get into the diseases, but there's a lot of cancers and things like that. None of them seem considering the gravity of the exposures, none of them seem out of the ordinary. You know, but I don't know. I think VA would be making a mistake to expend a lot of its resources on that when they should be expending its resources getting this whole thing implemented as smooth as possible, as quickly as possible. So, there's going to be time for a fight down the road on this. While it's trying to get implemented is not the time for that fight.
I don't know if smooth and quick are in their vocabulary, but we'll move on.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little hopeful guy there. All right, let me take a.
So obviously we're going through the bill. I mean, this bill is over 100 pages. It's really long. So that's why we're kind of going through and hitting the highlights, and there's a lot in here and there's things that we're skipping and covering, but we're trying to cover and at least touch on the things that will affect the most people.
Yeah, I'm trying to focus on some effective date issues here. So there's a section 204 in the part we're looking at now. It says reevaluation of claims for DIC involving presumption of service connection. This was a section I thought was interesting, and I know you're waiting for us to get to the presumptive part. But it's section 1305 in the actual bill. Reevaluation of dependency and indemnity compensation determinations pursuant to changes in presumptive service connection. It says, whenever a law, including through a regulation or federal court decision or settlement, establishes or modifies a presumption of service connection, the Secretary shall identify all claims for DIC under this chapter that were submitted to the Secretary, were evaluated and denied by the Secretary before the date on which such provision of law went into effect, and might have been evaluated differently had the establishment or modification been applicable to the claim, allow for the reevaluation of such claims at the election of the claimant, and notwithstanding section 5110 of this title, that's effective dates, by the way, with respect to claims approved pursuant to such reevaluation, provide compensation under this chapter effective as if the establishment or modification of the presumption of service connection had been in effect on the date of the submission of the original claim described in paragraph 1. That probably makes no sense to you. Yes. Because I'm reading from legislation and it's like pulling teeth with a pair of pliers.
I mean, I'm a lawyer and it's confusing for me. So like layman's terms.
Layman terms, it does appear that they, and other sections of the bill are similar to this. For DIC particularly, where veterans have died and surviving spouses have been denied benefits, this bill does seem to give an earlier effective date potential for a surviving spouse to retrospectively receive DIC, even though the veteran may have died well prior to this bill. Now, that is not carrying over for veterans. All right, this is for surviving spouses. So that's an interesting aspect. This is the first bill of any form like this that I've seen focus earlier effective dates on just survivors. And I think that's important.
So would that be a situation where this widow or spouse filed a claim and they were denied, and then now they can reopen it and go back to that original date?
Right. That's my understanding of it. If you fall into one of these categories, your spouse passed away, VA denied you spousal benefits, you can come back in now with a claim, request them to relook at that. And if this bill would have allowed or now allows for benefits, then that spouse can get DIC retrospectively. That's how I'm reading this. Obviously, a whole lot more to come on that, I'm sure.
I mean, my mind goes right to like glioblastoma, where that's quick and, they file a claim and it's denied, and then this doesn't pass for years later. So they have that opportunity to reopen that claim and get those retroactive benefits. So that could be really helpful for widowers. That's interesting. Yeah, I've never seen that.
So Title III in the bill is improving the establishment of service connection process for toxic exposed veterans. All right, so this doesn't create the actual presumptive diseases. It creates the presumption of exposure to toxic substances. Now, that wasn't really the problem VA was having with burn pits and Gulf War and things like that. They usually would not reject an exposure claim based on no exposure. They just conceded the exposure. But now they kind of have to. Now they have to concede the exposure. And I'll read a couple of sections of it. It says, presumption of specific toxic exposure for members who serve in certain locations. The Secretary shall, for the purposes of Section 1110 and Chapter 17 of this title, which is basically healthcare and benefits, presume that any covered veteran was exposed to the substances, chemicals, and airborne hazards identified in the list under paragraph 2 during the service of the covered veteran specified in subsection C1, unless there is affirmative evidence to establish the covered veteran was not exposed to any such substance, chemicals, or hazards in connection with such service. I lost another tooth there. I'm not going to go on reading all those sections and boring everybody, but let me get down to the definitions. In this section, the term covered veteran means anyone who on or after August 2nd, 1990 performed active military, naval, air, or space service while assigned to a duty station, including the above airspace in Bahrain, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, or the United Arab Emirates, or on or after 9/11, right? Afghanistan, Djibouti, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Uzbekistan, or any other country the Secretary determines. So that's a lot. All right. Most people in these conflicts are going to qualify for that. That's all I'll talk about that for now. The Secretary does, the bill does try to enhance the medical examination process. We're not going to really get into that because the presumptives won't require a medical opinion per se. They will require a medical exam, but not a medical nexus relating to the specific exposure. But there are provisions that do try to improve the examination process. That's something it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but I'll believe it when I see it. I don't think legislation alone is going to get us there.
So unlike Camp Lejeune, where you have to be there for at least 30 days, this is more similar to Vietnam, things like that, where it's just, you're there. You could be there one day. You could be there a week. You could be there 2 years. You're covered.
So now let's get into the presumptions of service connection. Now, I think this is what more people are going to be interested in. And we're going to go on. This is in Title 4 of the bill, titled Presumptions of Service Connection. Each section under this bill discusses a different type of presumption. So we'll just go down the list. All right. The first one is treatment of veterans who participated in cleanup of Atoll, I never can pronounce that, Atoll, I think it's in Alaska, as a radiation exposed veterans for the purposes of presumption of service connection for certain disabilities by the Department of Veterans Affairs. What this is doing in layman terms is adding the cleanup of Atoll Atoll from the period beginning January 1st, 1977 and ending December 31st, 1980 as a radiation risk activity. So if you were there helping in that cleanup, it was a nuclear plant that had some, if I'm thinking of the right one, I might be wrong, but I think that's the one that was a nuclear plant that They had some radiation leakage and it had to get cleaned up, and there were some exposures there. But it's never been considered by VA as an official radiation risk activity that would otherwise qualify you for the presumptions in that section of law. Section 3.309 is another one at section 311, yeah. So those folks are now added to that. Same thing for, I'll just read the paragraph here. On-site participation in the response effort following the collision of a United States Air Force B-52 bomber and refueling plane that caused the release of 4 thermonuclear weapons in the vicinity of Palermo, Spain, during the period of July 17, 1966 and ending March 31st, 1967. I've heard a lot about that in the past. Haven't seen a lot of claims of it, but you know, it was a collision. Nuclear weapons were released. They had to get retrieved, and those folks have never been considered a radiation risk activity. They are now.
So those are the sections for radiation. Those 2 areas they've expanded for radiation. If you served there, you're exposed to radiation, you get presumptions. And then now we'll move into the herbicides, which is this is the big part. I mean, for me, I know your Gulf War and burn pits and such, but this is where a lot of the veterans that I've interacted with and have is the Thailand and
Oh, wow.
Guam and things like that. So
Thailand's kind of my baby too.
Mhm.
So, all right. So the next section is titled Presumptions of Service Connection for Diseases Associated with Exposure to Certain Herbicide Agents for Veterans who served in certain locations. One sort of overarching thing, they're taking away Vietnam, served in Vietnam, in support of Vietnam, and now it's going to say certain locations. And so the statute's now going to define all those locations. So this section is adding Thailand, for all you Thailand veterans, to the list of presumptive exposure to herbicide agents will now be conceded anywhere in Thailand during the Vietnam era, and interestingly ending on June 30th, 1976, which confuses me a little because the Vietnam period ends May 7th, 1975. And the internal regulation was always consistent with the same time frame as Vietnam. So that's a little odd. It says in a section term, covered service means active military, naval, or air or space service performed in the Republic of Vietnam during the period January 9th, 62 to May 7th, 1975. But then the next section is performed in Thailand at any United States or Royal Thai base, that's important, during the period beginning on January 9th, 1962 and ending on June 30th, 1976, without regard to where on the base the veteran was located or what military job the veteran performed. So there's your Thailand presumption that goes.
So no more having. Yeah.
I don't know why it goes. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. No.
I was going to say no more statements of having to say I was this close to the base of the perimeter, and this is where I lived, and it was open air, and I saw this and that. No more of that. No more saying you had to do guard duty. No more of that. If you were on the base, you're covered.
And we should do a video sometime on Thailand. It's just, I'm thinking out loud here. I might get fired from videos on all the ways VA has tried to walk back Thailand and all the different types of claims that you just pull your hair out of your head as to why they're denying.
Or remanded.
Right. Things
so many
like,
remands.
On and near meaning 2 different things. On or near, not the same thing. VA coming out and expressly saying near means on. Well, we wouldn't have written on or near if they meant the same thing. So not using DOD's own research as to how far herbicide drift when ground spraying apparatuses were used. This is research they did years on to figure out exactly how far you need to be away from things you don't want to kill. All right, and they determined at least 500 yards. So if that's a spray drift, why wouldn't you use that as near? If DOD considers it near enough that that's where the drift's going to go. Little things like that. I'd love to do an episode, because the VA is not, Allison hit it right on the head. VA is not going to be able to come out and deny those silly things any longer because of this presumption. And
so you mentioned not using DOD records. So then my thought is, okay, are those DOD records considered service records? And then they were originally denied and you can reopen it because they didn't use those records originally. Is that a possibility? And that's for another video.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So moving on to this section, also, it not only adds Thailand, it adds Laos, about time for that. From December of 65 through September 30th of 69. So it doesn't cover the entire Vietnam period. But that's approximately when we sprayed herbicides in Laos, especially along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's been in contemporaneous military reports for years and years. I had a case not long ago where I swear VA acted as surprised as one could be that we use herbicides in Laos. And so no more of that. You now have to presume it. Same thing for Cambodia at Mimot or Krek Kampong Kam province. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Allison. If I'm not, if you can do better. But that's only from April 16th, 1969, ending on April 30th, 1969. Now, here's the big one that everybody's waiting on. Guam. You guys are really not going to want to hear that I didn't agree with this one. But hey, I say that, no, I will fight like hell for any Guam case and have won plenty of them. I just didn't really agree with the presumption of exposure for Guam. I've never saw that the evidence is really there, but it is now.
Yes.
It said, that section says performed on Guam or American Samoa or in the territorial waters thereof. So not just on Guam, during the period beginning January 9th, 1962, which is the beginning of Vietnam, and wait for it, to July 31st, 1980, 5 years after Vietnam ended, or served on Johnston Atoll, or on a ship that called at Johnston Atoll during the period beginning January 1st, 1972, and ending on September 30th, 1977. Why is that important? Now, this one I agree with. Johnston Atoll is where all the herbicides were stored when they were banned from being used in Vietnam. They shipped them all up, took them to Johnston Island, and they stored them there. Now, interesting here, this period is from January 1st, 1972. I don't think they got there at January 1st, 1972. I think it was in 73 or 74. But the law now says it's 72. And 77 is when they were burned at sea. So they were all loaded up in a ship, an incinerator ship, sailed out to sea and burned at sea. So that is why we have the ending date of September 30th, 1977. Now I am a little surprised, and this goes to the uneducated, which there are many in the world of legislation and regulations and exposures. And I'll just say this, because this will be future litigation, I have no doubt. They stopped using herbicides in Vietnam in 71, 70 and 71, depending on if they were coming out of a C-123 or being used as ground spraying apparatuses around perimeters, things like that. So different forms of delivery stopped at different times. But Congress extended the presumption of exposure all the way to 75. They did that because the same reason they did it for DMZ, the same reason they did it for C-123s. That is the environmental persistence of dioxin and Agent Orange. It didn't go away very quickly. It stayed around in the soil and the plants, so you could still be exposed to it. So that's not being applied to Johnston Atoll, clearly, and probably some others. Laos, they stopped in 1969 from my recall of the records, but the presumption's not going beyond 1969. So on that note, I expect that we will end up litigating part of that at some point. But nonetheless, Guam goes from the beginning of Vietnam all the way to July 31st, 1980, to include its waters. Johnston Atoll, January 1st, 72 to September 30th, 77. I read that to include its waters as well. How are you going to tell which ship stopped at Johnston Atoll? I don't know yet. That's going to be another bit of research that somebody's going to have to do. All right, so that's it for, make sure that's it for, that's it for the herbicide presumptives. But let's talk about effective dates and applicability. Okay, this is important. It says the amendments made by this section shall take effect on the date of enactment of this act. In other words, as soon as the president signs it into law, shall apply as follows: on the date of enactment of this act for claimants for DIC, we're a little pattern on DIC here, and for veterans whom the Secretary of Veterans Affairs determines are terminally ill, homeless, under extreme financial hardship, more than 85 years old, or capable of demonstrating other sufficient cause. Beyond that, it's October 1st, 2022 for everyone else. All right. So those are the presumptions we just talked about. That list, terminally ill, homeless, extreme financial hardship, those are all the things that VA will expedite a case for, to include advancing the case on the docket at the Board of Veterans Appeals. So if you're in that category or you're DIC, then you get adjudicated when the act becomes final. Otherwise, they don't start till October 1st of 2022. Some of these offsets, and this is not the only one, they're going to be set out in the future, is because this bill is so big, it would be physically impossible for VA to implement all of it at once. Right. So this is going to come in phases.
So on that,
Allison, go ahead, Allison.
It says more than 85 years old. That's the age for expedite at the regional office. At the board, it's 75. So
correct.
So are they going to continue it to be 75 at the board? And if you're at the board with these issues, you're going to get a decision sooner?
Yeah, this statute doesn't change that. The board's regulations say 75 for all cases. And so they will continue, because unless they do a proposal to change their regulation, which I highly doubt that. So yeah, I think that at the board, all cases for vets 75 or older, or claimants for 75 or older, are going to continue. Yeah, they should have done it 75 and older here, but we've always wondered for eons, me included, even as a former employee, I don't know why the ROs do it at 85 and the board does it at 75. I just think that's a little ridiculous. So
I agree.
All right, now also sticking with herbicides. All right, we've got two new presumptive diseases. One is hypertension. Everybody's been waiting on that. The other one is MGUS. It's monoclonal gammopathy of undetermined significance. Don't even ask me what that is. I'm not 100% certain. It's been floating around for quite some time, along with hypertension, as the next potential, presumptive disease for herbicide agents, and now it's going to come to light. The effective date provisions for this are the same as that we just went over. All right, October 1st, 2022 for everyone that's not DIC or terminally ill, homeless, extreme financial hardship, or more than 85 years old, or some other cause. Now, I'm going to read.
So for the MGUS, that's just a abnormal protein in your blood that it creates a condition. I've never come across a veteran that's had it, but I'm sure there are some out there. And the hypertension, that's a lot of people, but are most of them going to be 0%? But hypertension, that can lead to a lot of other conditions for secondary, heart disease, diabetes, chronic kidney disease and such. So, that's why I look at it that way. But also the rating for hypertension is supposed to be based off of what your readings were prior to medication. So just put that out there too. Now,
I want to read one paragraph just as it stands here. Now, this paragraph is in the hypertension section and the monoclonal gammopathy section. It says, notwithstanding any federal court decision or settlements in effect on the day before the date of the enactment of this act, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs shall award retroactive claims for a condition under Section 1116A2L of Title 38 United States Code, as added by subsection B of this section, only to claimants for DIC under Chapter 13 of such title described in subparagraph A1 of this paragraph. Now, for those of you not trained on NEMR, I read that as they have just legislated out NEMR for these two conditions for everyone except DIC claimants. Now, I might be misinterpreting that because, I'm not a federal judge. I don't get paid to interpret the law, but that's what that sounds like. I know from my own experiences, VA has wanted to legislate out NEMR on a lot of things that NEMR would otherwise apply to. It looks like they convinced, and the only way they could do it was to get Congress to do it. There's no way VA ever had the authority to do anything with Agent Orange and say NEMR doesn't really apply, but Congress can. And here where they say, notwithstanding any federal court decision or settlements. All right, the NEMR case was both of those, a federal court decision followed by a settlement. And I know that's what they're targeting there. So be that as it may, it doesn't look like, but now if you're the vet, let me kind of rephrase that. If you're the surviving spouse who's applying for DIC, and we just try to create a scenario here, hypertension, where your veteran spouse died of a stroke, or maybe he had a stroke 10 years ago and died 2 years ago, right? And maybe filed a claim and got denied service connection with that stroke. Maybe he was in a wheelchair or lost use of a couple of extremities after the stroke, things that strokes do. And VA denied the benefit and then denied DIC. As I'm reading this, NEMR would still apply to that particular person unless VA tries to interpret this only for the DIC portion of this benefit. In other words, under NEMR, that widow would get the 8 years of compensation for the stroke caused by the hypertension, plus the 2 years of DIC from the time that the veteran's been dead up to the present point. And the way I read this is that will still happen. So if you've got cases like that, if you're a widow out there and your spouse died of something related to hypertension and was denied benefits, this will likely have a big benefit for you. Unless VA.
So what about if you are a Thailand veteran and you have something that's been pending for years? Are you still going to get that date because you've continuously appealed it, or is it the date of the act?
It's the date of the act for Thailand veterans from my reading of this.
Okay, so I mean, that's something that I'm concerned about. If someone's been appealing it and they've consistently appealing it for 5 years, they just don't get those 5 years. They get
and so everyone needs to be aware of that. That's a very good point. This is not going to end your appeals when not in a lot of cases when going forward, when this passes, you might no longer have a fight with VA, but you're still going to be fighting for those retroactive benefits, and we're still going to be fighting those claims. So it's not going to go away all of a sudden. So just keep that in mind. All right, moving on. We're finally getting past herbicides. Gulf War vets, improving compensation for disabilities occurring in Persian Gulf War vets. Persian Gulf War vets, which have now been redefined according to this bill. It doesn't do much for Persian Gulf War vets specifically for the Persian. That's coming out wrong. Let me just go over it and I'll explain. So the first section there is reduction in threshold of eligibility. And it says subsection A1 of section 1116 is amended by striking became manifest and all that follows through the period at the end, and inserting became manifest to any degree at any time. What that means is right now, the requirement is for a disease to become compensable, to manifest to a compensable degree within a specified period of time. This is saying now that specified period of time is gone forever, and that disease can manifest at any time, not just within that window, and to any amount, not just to a compensable amount. That's important there because otherwise the law for Gulf War vets, and if you're a Gulf War vet, think about fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, medically unexplained chronic multi-symptom illnesses. Those are the things we're talking about here. So you no longer have a time window, so those benefits are not going to run out, and you no longer have to meet a compensable threshold. You just have to meet a manifestation threshold. So I think that's about time. Another good addition to this portion, this group of vets, is that it now includes Afghanistan, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, those specific places. So Afghanistan is the big one here. Okay. VA I tried to add Afghanistan 12 years ago, and OMB shot VA down on that. That's a discussion for another day. But VA felt, not just me, VA, my boss and everybody felt Afghanistan should be added to Gulf War list of combat theaters. It now has been. So if you're in Afghanistan, but not in Iraq, and after this bill passes, you've been denied or come down with chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia or something that would qualify under 3.317 or 1117 of the statute, this bill is going to cover you now, even though you weren't in Iraq and were not considered a Gulf War veteran. You are going to be a Gulf War veteran now. So that, I think that's a really good change here. Allison, anything on that?
No, I agree. Absolutely. Afghanistan has been kind of slighted. Finally, been added in.
Yeah. Now for the big part. Presumption of service connection for certain diseases associated with exposure to burn pits and other toxins. I will just read this. For the purposes of section 1110 of this title and subsection 113, that is compensation and spouses compensation is basically what that is. A disease specified in subsection B becoming manifest in a covered veteran shall be considered to have been incurred in or aggravated during active military, naval, or air or space service, notwithstanding there is no record of evidence of such disease during service. Note that I said become manifest, not manifest to a compensable degree. So they're keeping that tune that they started with the Gulf War vets. Now, the diseases specified in this section are the following. Here's where you want to take notes. Asthma that was diagnosed after service of the covered veteran as specified in subsection C. Now, let me stop there and the reason that's got a little qualifier to it, diagnosed after service. All right, because when they added asthma to a presumptive, it's now a presumptive condition for burn pits. They made it a 10-year window. I don't agree with that because you could have been knowing these respiratory diseases. Some of these guys fight for years just to figure out what's wrong with their lungs. So to give them a 10-year window, I don't agree with it. This takes away that 10-year window, and that's good. Going on, the following types of cancer: head cancer of any type, neck cancer of any type, respiratory cancer of any type, gastrointestinal cancer of any type, reproductive cancer of any type, lymphoma cancer of any type. Are you starting to see why I'm a little excited about this? Lymphomatic cancer of any type, kidney cancer, brain cancer, melanoma, pancreatic cancer. Not done yet. Chronic bronchitis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, constrictive bronchiolitis, emphysema, I never can pronounce that word, granulomatous disease. We get, Allison, can you pronounce that better than I can?
Granulomatous.
There you go. Interstitial lung disease, pleuritis, pulmonary fibrosis, sarcoidosis, chronic sinusitis, chronic rhinitis, and this one's for Joe Biden, glioblastoma. For those of you who aren't aware, his son served in Iraq and died of glioblastoma brain tumor. The reason I say that, and I, with all seriousness, I've handled a number of glioblastoma cases. They've all been granted. But it said brain cancer, all right, was on the list.
Any brain cancer, and then they specified this one.
Head cancer of any type and brain cancer. Glioblastoma is a brain cancer, but it says glioblastoma specifically. So I'm almost certain that's a shout out to Joe Biden's son. I put money on it. So whatever that's worth, and that's okay. The amendments, now here we're getting into some more effective date issues here with these benefits, and these are weird. Okay. Same thing for the DIC and the hardship cases. All right, they're every disability I just listed, they go into effect immediately for that group. Okay, and I'm not going to try to parse this out because I would need a graph and probably a I don't know, something to do this with, spreadsheet or something to show you. So there's numerous dates that the rest of these things go into effect. And it says on the date of enactment of this act for everyone not described in paragraph 1. Paragraph 1 was the DIC and the hardships. With respect to paragraphs, the date of enactment of this act with respect to paragraphs 1, 2C, 2I, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
I have it separated all out.
Do you? Oh,
yeah.
I'm going to turn. Sorry.
Okay,
I'll turn this over to Allison because.
Yeah. So basically, it states by paragraph, but I went through and separated them all out. So basically, affected on the enactment date are asthma that was diagnosed after service, respiratory cancer of any type, brain cancer, constrictive bronchiolitis or obliterative bronchiolitis, emphysema, granulomatous disease, interstitial lung disease, pleuritis, pulmonary fibrosis, sarcoidosis, chronic rhinitis, chronic sinusitis, and glioblastoma. And then the next is October 1st, 2023, is the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and the chronic bronchitis. October 1st, 2024 is head cancer of any type, neck cancer of any type, gastrointestinal cancer of any type, reproductive cancer of any type, lymphoma cancer of any type, and pancreatic cancer. And then October 1st, 2025 is kidney cancer and melanoma. I have no clue how they decided which ones would be which date, but yeah, that is how it's going to be phased in.
Yeah, that, and thanks for doing that, Allison, because I was, should I break these out? Well, I know why they're doing this. They're doing this because of workload considerations in large part.
Yeah, but if you have advanced melanoma, I mean,
there are many reasons I disagree with this. If you're fighting your claim right now, and maybe you don't have access to good health care, maybe you don't have service connection for anything. Now, this bill may change some of that with respect to the healthcare side of it. But let's say it didn't. Let's say it's like most bills. They just, it provide you service connection, but then it's not going to go into effect till 2025. And you're dying now, or maybe, so I would think those vets or those clients are still going to file claims, and they probably already have. And I think most people who have these diseases have probably already filed claims. VA did this for workload considerations, but if you're getting a lot of claims for things the law now says you can't implement for another year, you still have all these claims. Unless you're so busy with this other stuff, you can't even look at those other claims. I don't think this is making things more efficient, because you're going to have to look at it to determine that you can't yet do it. By the time you determine that, you could have rated that case, because it's now a presumption. So, when you don't have to deal with development and medical opinions and things like that, one thing the presumptions do is allow VA to be far more efficient. And I don't know that this phase in of some of this is giving them any more efficiency. In fact, it could very well backfire. But I can't really argue with their wanting to be able to control their workflow. There are provisions in here that tell VA if you can implement the stuff earlier, then do so. Okay, so this is just Congress saying, we're not going to make you fail by giving you so much work you could never achieve it. And that's what that really talks about.
It's kind of sad though. I mean, like, if it were me and I were doing it, I would put the very aggressive cancers first, not all of the asthma and things like that, even though I guess that affects more people. But I mean, also is that, those are cancers and they may have passed by then. So if you're married, make sure, DIC claims will continue the claim, but like that upsets me in that it's split up like that, especially with all of the different cancers being later. But it is what it is. Like Kerry said before, there's positives and negatives, and it's a compromise, and it's a compromise we'll have to deal with.
Yeah. And going forward, there's not much else in the bill that people are really going to be that concerned with. There's a lot of research, a lot of reports. There are some things that are, interesting, or at least potentially interesting. For example, VA has to create a public website for toxic exposure research. I have a feeling they're just going to use their public health website for that, but I might be wrong. They have to study the effects of jet fuels used by their armed forces. We have tons of those kinds of claims where people are exposed to just a lot of fuels and believe some of their problems are due to that. And sure enough, some have been shown to be.
They're also opening more offices to be able to handle the workload.
Yeah, there's a lot of funding provisions.
31 new offices and new staff. So there's
lots of funding provisions and infrastructure provisions that, is good to have, definitely needed in there, but I don't think we need to cover those. For my Fort McClellan veterans, I haven't forgot about you. I would not do that. But this bill does not cover you. It does, however, mandate that VA conduct an epidemiological study on the health trends of veterans who served at Fort McClellan anytime beginning January 1st, 1935 and ending at May 2nd, 1999, or May 20th, 1999.
So with that happening, do you think moving forward, that could be something eventually?
It could. I'm worried where it says the Secretary of Veterans Affairs shall conduct an epidemiological study. I mean, obviously the public health office will be the ones probably doing that. I have not agreed with their positions on numerous things in the past. I think sometimes they play hide the ball or some shell games, and I don't know how much they're obviously not supporting some of this. So I'd rather see an independent body do that epidemiological research, but it is what it is. Nothing we could change that. So.
And it includes the Camp Lejeune Justice Act too, right? Where
yes.
Yeah, you lived or worked Camp Lejeune for at least 30 days between August 1st, 1953 and December 31st, 1987. Later suffered an illness linked to it. You can sue the government for damages. Now,
Allison, you want to go into that a little bit, what that means? Because that's probably more in your wheelhouse, because that's big. You've never been able to do that before.
Yeah, I mean, that is big. And
it's not VA. It's not VA. That's why I want Allison to touch on this, because it's not a VA benefit.
Yeah, so basically, instead of it's more or less kind of like a tort claim in that you can sue the actual government. It's a federal case rather than suing VA, which is an administrative entity. And this is not something that I've seen before, especially with VA. But basically, there can't be punitive damages or anything like that. But there's disposition by the federal agency, and they can bring an action to state if you developed a condition or you had someone who passed away. And I'm curious to see if it's going to include family members as well, to bring damages, because that's something that covered an expansive period of time. I mean, my grandfather was at Camp Lejeune, and he died of brain cancer, which is most likely caused by that. So this is a separate remedy that are available to veterans that veterans ask about all the time. I feel like veterans are asking me, well, can I sue them for damages? I'm always like, no, that's not how it works. VA does what it wants. But this opens the door for that with Camp Lejeune. And I'm curious to see what this will be in the final form. And we can discuss it more when that occurs. But this is something new. And
Allison, this does include people other than the veteran.
Okay, good.
Yeah, even in utero.
Yes, because that's the issue, is that people who were there and they had children, and there were children born at Camp Lejeune, and they develop all of these conditions that affect them their entire life and have all these medical costs and medical bills and such. This opens the door for suing for that, which is extremely interesting.
Now, what do you think about the no punitive damages? Because isn't that, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that where the majority of funds come from in tort cases?
Not necessarily. I mean, punitive is if they did it intentionally. So you can only get punitive damages if it was like intentional misconduct or gross negligence. I don't know when they found out that what was going on was damaging. But yes, could there be an argument for it? But I think the fact that they're allowing them to get anything at all is a start. I don't think punitive damages is going to happen. I mean, basically you get punitive damages to punish someone. And are we really going to give the government a slap on the wrist and with all this money to give to the claimants? I mean, yeah, I think so, but is it going to happen? No. And that's why they specifically state that is they're like, okay, yeah, we can open the door to give you damages, but there's not going to be punitive to punish us. Like, this is us punishing ourselves by even opening the door to this.
That's a good point. Now, if I could add, if you are getting VA benefits from Camp Lejeune and you do sue them and get an award, there's going to be an offset. Now, if you're the family member, there's obviously not going to be an offset because the family members can't get VA compensation. So definitely keep that in mind if you go down that route. All right.
I think that's all the big points, unless you have anything else, and we can do another one later where we answer specific questions, or if anyone wants a video on a specific topic, like Kerry said, definitely Thailand. That's possible too. Is there anything else you want to cover before we sign off?
I think that's it. We've definitely hit the high points. Probably too many of them in such a short window, even though it's a long video.
So with this isn't finalized. Like we said before, the House still has to accept the amendments by Senate, and then it'll go to the president. That's what we're waiting on now, is for the House to make comment on the amendments and whether they're going to accept them or not. Hopefully they will. Make it easy. President has already said he's going to sign it, and then we can move forward with it. So this is how it is, how it stands right now. It could change. And as we get more information about it, we will disseminate it to you. And I'm sure we will do plenty more videos on this, because this is going to affect a lot of people, and we can go into more detail on the specific veterans who are included in each section of the toxic exposure. But thank you, Kerry, for explaining all of that. I know this is complicated and it's going to help a lot of people, but I'm glad we have you to explain it for us. And as we get more information, we'll let you guys know. And we thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.